Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We begin with the dam breaking in response to Trump's disgusting remarks following the murder of Rob Reiner and his wife, as tolerance for this sick, stupid, cruel and vulgar man's behavior even upset some in MAGA world, while Trump's poll numbers crater and his public appearances are reduced by 40%, leading to concerns about his deteriorating mental and physical health. Joining us is Moira Donegan, writer-in-residence at the Clayman Institute for Gender Research at Stanford University. Her work has appeared in the London Review of Books, Book Forum, and the Paris Review. She's the co-host of the podcast In Bed with the Right and a columnist at The Guardian, where her latest article is What is Going On with Donald Trump's Health? Then we'll examine Friday's release of some of Epstein's files by Trump's lackeys at the Department of Justice, who are trying to shift the focus away from Trump to Bill Clinton, while redacting huge portions of the limited release, claiming they are protecting victims, but appear to be shielding perpetrators. Joining us is James Zirin, a former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, and the host of the critically acclaimed television talk show Conversation with Jim Zirin, which airs on PBS. He's the author of Supremely Partisan, How Raw Politics Tips the Scales in the United States Supreme Court, and Plaintiff-in-Chief, a portrait of Donald Trump in 3,500 lawsuits. He's a contributing editor at the Washington Monthly, where his latest article is Brown, Bondi Beach, and the Reiners, A Murderous December. Then finally we'll speak with Samuel Moyn, the Henry R. Luce Professor of Jurisprudence at Yale Law School and a Professor of History at Yale University. He has written several books in his fields of European intellectual history, human rights history and law, including Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War, and Liberalism Against Itself, Cold War Intellectuals in the Making of Our Times. His forthcoming book is Gerontocracy in America, How the Old are Hoarding Power and Wealth and What to Do About It. And we'll discuss his op-ed at The Guardian, It's Time to Accept that the United States Supreme Court is illegitimate and must be replaced. And before we begin, for over a decade, we have warned that Trump is both a criminal and likely a traitor, not to mention he's mentally unstable, egomaniacal, woefully ignorant, wildly incompetent, insatiably greedy, and corrupt. Now it should be clear to all that his chaotic misrule must be ended as soon as possible, and until that happens, Background Briefing will continue to investigate and expose MAGA criminality and cruelty. But more importantly, explore strategies and popular movements to bring about regime change as quickly as possible, to restore democracy and civility, and stop the systematic destruction of the United States at home and its standing abroad. To help sustain us with public broadcasting and freedom of the press itself under assault as Trump's billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media, you can make a tax-deductible donation to our nonprofit foundation, the Public Truth Media Foundation, at publictruthmedia.org or at backgroundbriefing.org/donate. And thank you. And joining us now is Moira Donegan, writer-in-residence at the Clayman Institute for Gender Research at Stanford University. Her work has appeared in the London Review of Books, Book Forum, and the Paris Review, and she's the co-host of the podcast In Bed with the Right and a columnist at The Guardian, where her latest article is What's Going On with Donald Trump's Health? Welcome to Background Briefing, Moira Donegan.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And somehow it seems, Moira, that the dam broke with Donald Trump's reaction to the murder of Rob Reiner and his wife, in as much as I think a lot of Americans were appalled by what he said. And for the life of me, I don't understand why they haven't been following what's been going on for the last 10 years, or even going back further. When he first appeared on the political scene back in 2015, I talked to a bunch of Wall Street people who had met with him and Goldman Sachs to set up meetings to try and do deals. And they all said that the guy was crazy. They couldn't stand being with him. He just talks about himself. He's in his own world. And then when he started to run for the presidency, the former Republican presidential candidate in 2012, Mitt Romney, went public and warned. He said, this guy's a con man. His word is as worthless as a diploma from Trump's university. And then Senators Bob Corker and Jeff Flake both went public saying how immoral and dangerous and crazy this guy is. now, and of course they got booted out of politics or had to get out. So it's not as if there hasn't been some warning. So why has it taken so long?
Yeah, I think you're right that basically nobody who had a low opinion of Trump has changed their mind over the past decade. And those who were trying to sound the alarm about this guy have largely been proven correct. But I think, over the past year or so, the duration of his, you know, second term thus far, and really the past few months, I would say since, November or so, there has been a pretty rapid erosion of the cohesion of the MAGA base. The assassination of Charlie Kirk in September looked briefly like it was going to be this great rallying and unification for the MAGA movement. And what happened instead is that it seems if, perhaps Kirk himself was a bit of a unifying force, but perhaps, the crucible of the second term has led some of the, erstwhile alliances within the MAGA movement to sort of crack, and for people who were once kind of unfailingly supportive of Donald Trump to begin looking for the exits. I think he is no longer as able as he once was to consolidate that far right support into control of the Republican Party. And what we're seeing now is the emergence of what might be, I think, the Donald Trump lame duck period.
Well, Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk, has just said she's endorsing J.D. Vance for president. So that seems like a shot across the bow. But again, it's taken so long, and it's hard to believe that people aren't noticing how he's losing it, particularly, as you've written, in terms of his mental and physical health. The one thing about him, though, that's extraordinary, and I think you could frame what's been happening for the last 10 plus years as a battle between reality and alternative reality. This guy has an amazing willpower, and he basically willed so many people in this country to believe that the Russians had nothing to do with electing him in 2016, that he actually won the election in 2020, that the economy is great, that tariffs are working, etc., etc. So is that what this is about, in a sense, about whether or not reality is going to trump alternative reality?
I think you're right that Donald Trump sort of facilitated, encouraged, and also benefited from this much broader trend that, coincided with his ascent to the top of national politics, which is epistemic collapse, right? Collapse in trust of the media and in the trust of, sort of credentialed experts, professors, doctors, all these people who have sort of claimed epistemic authority in previous decades are now sort of no longer able to make that authority very efficacious or commanding, right? There's a lot of do your own research, a lot of skepticism of, elites. And that was something that Donald Trump very much used to his advantage for a long time. I do think you are right to say that it is a strategy that can run into some limits in people's lived realities, lived experiences, right? So this week Donald Trump really seized control over the networks during prime time, more or less to berate the American public for not thinking that the economy is stronger than it is, right? And that is, I think, a nice distillation of the problem. Trump used to be able to sort of shape reality, at least for about half of the country, to his own interests. But now you see in these plummeting poll numbers, the really sinking approval ratings, even on things that used to be his strongest issues like immigration and the economy, you now see him failing to be able to control reality that way, failing to be able to get people to believe in a lie because their own experiences are contradicting his preferred version of events a little too much.
Well, how do you create a reality-based community in post-truth America, which has been my mission statement for over the last 10 years?
God, if I knew the answer to that, I would be go be off doing it. I think it's up to people who have a commitment to the truth to keep telling it. And beyond that, I think there is regulatory changes that need to be made in the, internet and media landscape that there is just no political will for right now.
Well, it seems that the tech titans, the oligarchs in Silicon Valley, have basically changed the landscape to equate reality with alternative reality, alternative facts, as Kelly Lee Conway once coined that phrase, which unfortunately had a lot more truth to it. So that's where I find it difficult is, where do people get their information from? And so much of it comes on through social media. And it seems when you look at the people that are the powerful people in the social media world and in the tech world, there's some really sick puppies there. Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, Curtis Yarvin. Those are the people that are manipulating people's minds and shaping some of the most toxic opinions. And I don't know how you cleanse the information environment.
Yeah, one reason I oppose the existence of billionaires is because billionaire consolidation over, these internet media companies and over traditional media companies, newspapers, broadcast news channels, and the like is a real epistemic threat. I think something we see in case studies like what happened to Twitter that became X after the Elon Musk takeover, in examples of what's become over the past year or so of the Washington Post, you really see these platforms reshaping their projects to be for an audience of one. This is something a phrase we use to characterize, say, Fox News's Sunday coverage during the first Trump administration, where you would have these political actors go on to give fawning interviews about how much they loved Donald Trump. And this was, broadcast for an audience of one, that one being the president whose ego was being assuaged. And now you see things like, X's algorithm or X's Grok platform really being crafted to be for an audience of one, which is Elon Musk, right? Designed to reflect back to Elon Musk his, narcissistic delusions, his investments, his commitments, his preferences. I think the Washington Post editorial board is now taking on a very similar project, trying to serve the preferences and the ego of Jeff Bezos, and so what you have instead is independent voices who are more committed to the truth and to their readers and to, these old-fashioned values of honesty and integrity really being pushed out of those mainstream venues and into sort of the independent fringe.
But it's not just that the tech bros like Musk poison the minds of Americans and people around the world. They're also, their vast fortunes are being deployed to help elect Trump and Republicans. Musk was the biggest donor in the last election, about $300 million he donated, and he's starting again to, basically buy House and Senate seats for Republicans to stop a Democratic takeover in the midterms. You could argue that X is a political donation to the Republicans in kind, because that's what its main function is. And Bezos, for God's sake, he just gave, $42 million to this Me Too director to make this ridiculous propaganda piece for Melania Trump. I guess it's an exercise in reputation washing. My understanding is that one of the main tasks of Trump's orders to the Justice Department in redacting these Epstein files that have been started to dribble out in a very selective way. They're going after Bill Clinton and redacting so much stuff. It's pretty clear what the agenda is, but my understanding is that one of the top priorities for Trump is to make sure that Melania is not mentioned in any of these files because of her close ties to Epstein back in the 1990s. And Michael Wolff, of course, argues that Epstein introduced them. So the deployment of their money, and I guess the crowning glory of this argument I'm trying to make, will be this dreadful ballroom which will live on forever as an insult to us all, not to mention, of course, the insult to the memory of Jack Kennedy to have Trump's name above his at the Kennedy Center.
Yeah, there's a few different pieces there. One thing I think is that Donald Trump is clearly sort of being given these like make work distraction projects, like this bribery ballroom that he's erecting where the East Wing once was, like the, renovations in other parts of the White House, like his name being slapped up onto the Kennedy Center now. These are all kind of like things you give to grandpa to make him feel important. No offense to the grandfathers who might be listening. While other people do the real work. He's clearly not the person actually making policy decisions in the White House. That is a role being left to the likes of Russ Vought and Stephen Miller. So Donald Trump is the president in name, and a lot of the executive branch is sort of being wielded towards his interests and his ego, but he's not really in charge of policy in a meaningful way. But the other thing you mentioned, of course, is the Epstein files, right? And the Epstein controversy. And something that I think you can see both in Trump's plunging poll numbers on the economy and the growing distrust of his impulses within his own movement, and then also in this ongoing, now pretty thoroughly bipartisan fascination with the Epstein files, is that epistemic collapse, that distrust of authority and expertise and intelligence and sort of, letterhead of official sanction that Trump rode up into the White House beginning in 2015 and 2016, that is not something that he can now control, right? Donald Trump and his lackeys are now at the head of these organizations, at the head of the, economic research institutes of the federal government, at the head of the Department of Justice, at the head of the FBI that's supposed to be investigating all of this wrongdoing. And now people who don't trust authority don't trust Donald Trump either. He is an authority. He has been in authority and at the center of American politics for a decade now. He is no longer able to pretend that he is a virtuous outsider challenging corrupt elites. And I think the Epstein story, all of these photos of him with his arms around a pedophile sex trafficker and financier, really gives the lie to this notion that Donald Trump sold to his supporters, that he was an outsider willing to speak truth to power.
Well, but he's always been a sick and sad and broken man. We're talking about his being a vulgarian now in terms of imposing his appalling taste on us all, gilded Oval Office, this ballroom, putting his name on the Kennedy Center. But if you go back to his childhood, you can see that he was broken by a horrible and cruel father. The first son, the oldest, was a broken man who turned to alcoholism and died young. And Trump, of course, was told by his horrible father, the Nazi, you got to be a killer son, you got to be a killer son. And then he got tutored by Roy Cohn and hung out with the mob and then laundered all this Russian money, and he was never really a billionaire. He played one on a TV series that conned enough people. And it's all about the con. I mean, isn't it in the country's DNA? If you go back to think about all those televangelists, Jimmy Swaggart, Jim Baker. A lot of people could see right away what frauds they were, but they got a lot of mileage. And Herman Melville wrote an extraordinary book called The Confidence Man, which is again about the DNA of the kind of hucksters that Trump is. So what does it say about us or our vulnerability to hucksters?
Yeah, I think America is a nation with a lot of fantasies about upward mobility, right? And a lot of founding myths about how anybody can make it here. And that implies a kind of, earnest hopefulness in the national ethos that I think does maybe make Americans a little bit vulnerable to being lied to, or manipulated in the service of somebody else's interests about their own dreams. That's a very American story. Like like the Music Man or the monorail episode of The Simpsons. But I think also something that has always confounded me with Trump and with a lot of sort of his similar creatures of his genre on the right is the question of whether they believe what they're saying, right? Because sometimes they seem profoundly cynical in telling a lie, right? Sometimes they very much seem like that they know that they're lying and that they're trying to pull one over on the audience that they consider sort of suckers. And then sometimes they've told that lie so often and with such a like a fierceness and defensiveness around it that I think, oh my God, they've come to believe it, you know? And I've come to think that it's not an either or. It's not either they're lying or they're crazy, right? There's something in the myth making that Trump does about himself that he has become very psychologically dependent on. You know, the lies that are lies he tells to us are also lies often that he tells to himself and that he really relies on. And I am
Right.
fascinated and also a little bit nervous to see what he will do as they start to come crashing down.
Right. Yeah. Like China pays for the tariffs. Right. There you have it. Well, Moira, I thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I went rambling on here and ranting, but I just cannot believe that this man has been elected twice and has done so much damage, and the damage has barely begun, and he's only been in office for 11 months now, and of course waiting in the wings is this dreadful replacement. So
It's
I'm looking for a little holiday cheer in the last minute here.
well, it's a dark time, Ian. But I do think that something that those of us who are opposed to Trump can take some credit in is the reality that, there is actually not a ton of consensus, I think, about what will come after Trump for the Republican Party. I think JD Vance is clearly very ambitious, but I do not think he will be uncontested when he runs in that Republican primary. I do not think that he is universally liked within the MAGA coalition, and I do not think he has Donald Trump's capacity for manipulation and charm. He is not the kind of guy who can replicate Trump's ability to hold a coalition together with his charisma. So I think one thing that might happen in 2026 is that MAGA might begin to eat their own. And that at least is something that I think we can look forward to.
Well, Moira Donegan, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
It's always a pleasure, Ian. Thank you so much.
And again, I've been speaking with Moira Donegan, who's a writer in residence at the Clayman Institute for Gender Research at Stanford University. Her work has appeared in the London Review of Books, Book Forum, and the Paris Review, and she's the co-host of the podcast In Bed with the Right and a columnist at The Guardian, where her latest article is What's Going On with Donald Trump's Health. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back examining the release of some of the Epstein files by Trump's lackeys at the DOJ, who are trying to shift the focus away from Trump to Bill Clinton while redacting huge portions of the limited release, claiming they are protecting victims, but they appear to be shielding perpetrators.
He's a real nowhere man, sitting in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody. Doesn't have a point of view, knows not where he's going to. Isn't he a bit like you and me?
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is James Zirin, a former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York and the host of the critically acclaimed television talk show Conversations with Jim Zirin, which airs on PBS. He's the author of Supremely Partisan, How Raw Politics Tips the Scales in the United States Supreme Court, and Plaintiff-in-Chief, a portrait of Donald Trump in 3,500 lawsuits. He's a contributing editor at the Washington Monthly, where his latest article is Brown, Bondi Beach, and the Rhinos, The Murderous December. Welcome to Background Briefing, James Zirin.
Delighted to be with you, Ian.
Well,
Back
thanks.
again.
Back again, and as we face the holidays, the season of joy, not a lot of it around, and a lot of anticipation, of course, ahead of Friday's release of the Epstein files, but they only released about 10% of them. there were 500 pages that were fully redacted, and those were had pictures of Trump and Melania with Epstein and Maxwell. So this, you've got Ro Khanna and Tom Massey, the two bipartisan Congress people who got the discharge petition through. They're furious. They're talking about impeaching Bondi, the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and Kash Patel. Is that realistic? Can you impeach these people?
Well, theoretically, you could. It would require a majority of the House, and the majority is Republican, and it would require 2/3 of the Senate, where the majority is Republican. So it's highly unlikely that any of them will be impeached. However, it's clear that the Justice Department ignored the mandate of the statute, which was that they furnish all of the Epstein files, including grand jury materials, within 30 days. That expired on the 19th of November. The statute, however, had no penalty for failure to provide the files. And so we have this first wave of the drip feed of information, none of which is particularly startling and none of which is particularly new. Maybe there's something new and startling under the redactions, but we won't know that for some time.
And what about the other 90%? What do you expect from that?
Well, if it's heavily redacted, I don't really expect that much will come that's informative. It's interesting that the disclosure that was made was heavily weighted against the Democrats. There were the pictures of Bill Clinton in the jacuzzi and Bill Clinton with a woman, his arm around a woman, no pictures of Trump. And the Wall Street Journal said that the statute required that they make the documents searchable, and they did a search for Trump and they came up with nothing. So anything that involved Trump was clearly withheld from the disclosure.
So the 1,000 FBI agents that were sent to go through this material and basically launder it to get rid of mentions of Trump and Melania, etc., that's the suspicion at the time. It looks like that's what happened.
Looks like that's what happened. Certainly, these thousands of agents trained in going through voluminous files and conducting an investigation came up with one big nothing burger.
So this is pretty cynical, isn't it? Not surprising, but pretty cynical. So obviously the House is out and they're not going to do anything about it. And it needs 2/3 in the Senate. That's not going to happen. What can be done here beyond hand-wringing?
Well, I'm not so sure that anything can be done. I guess congressmen could try to bring a lawsuit if the court found they had standing to enforce the statute's mandate. I think they'll have to wait until the Justice Department represents that the disclosure is complete. I think what really needs to be done here is that a court or some other impartial body will have to go through all the documents and look at the unredacted documents and compare it with the redacted documents to make sure that the redactions are honest and were made in good faith and comply with the mandate of the statute.
And you don't think there's a possibility of mischief that any of these documents could disappear? Because apparently there's one that was seen in a drawer of Trump, a picture of Trump with about 6 women around him, models. That doesn't appear in the list, yet it's seen in a photograph of a drawer that was opened.
Yes, I don't know about that, but that'll have to be pursued. And I think really it's going to be in the court of public opinion. It's for the media to expose the fact, if it is a fact, that the production was not made in good faith. And in fact, the production itself was inconsistent because they redacted certain materials in one document that are disclosed in another document. So it was very sloppy. And we will have to depend on the media really to uncover where the truth lies.
So, Jim, let's talk about your article at the Washington Monthly, Brown, Bondi Beach, and the Rhinos, the Murderous December. Our earlier segment today, we were suggesting that Trump's outrageous and disgusting response to the murder of Rob Reiner and his wife is kind of the dam is broken in a way, where a lot of people who normally support Trump, even some in MAGA world, are now pretty disgusted with him. Do you see a change in the public attitude to Trump?
Well, I think the public attitude toward Trump is eroding, but you now find a group of people who say, well, Trump isn't so good, but his policies are good. But even faith in his policies is eroding. We have a rising inflation. The November inflation numbers cannot be relied upon because the government was shut down during that period and data is unavailable. And the people are feeling that life in the United States is much less affordable than it used to be. And they are seeing that Trump's tariff policies really have not worked. And they are very much alarmed by the vindictive prosecutions of Jim Comey and Letitia James. They're alarmed by the extrajudicial murders on the high seas of drug mules who weren't even heading, arguably, toward the United States, but were heading toward Suriname or some other country, and not carrying fentanyl, but probably carrying cocaine, if they were carrying any drugs at all. And all that seems to be swept under the rug. And as we learned during Watergate, it's the underlying crimes are not so serious or hardly so serious as the cover-up. And we're seeing a tremendous cover-up here.
So, just in the holiday season, do you think things could get worse after you've, Brown University, Bondi Beach, and the Rhinos, as you mentioned?
Well, you don't know. There were other murders and killings in December as well. The killings of the American troops in Syria, which Trump is trying to avenge. And it just seems to be a very bloody month. And who knows in what direction it's going to go. But I like to be optimistic. I'm optimistic by nature, but you see these things going on and you wonder what's happening in the United States.
Right. And there's a possible shoe could drop with a military action against Venezuela.
Yes. It certainly seems as if we're all cranked up to accomplish a regime change in Venezuela.
And just in closing, what about regime change here? A lot of questions about Trump's health, his mental health, his physical health.
Well, at the moment, nothing seems to be budging on that. These rants, these tantrums, these disgusting statements about the Reiners. I mean, Karl Rove, even conservative Karl Rove in a Wall Street Journal column, condemned the statements. Other conservatives and Republicans have condemned it as well. And you wonder how long is anyone going to have trust in this president?
Well, waiting in the wings is J.D. Vance. That's not exactly encouraging, at least from my point of view.
I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. But if for some reason Trump stepped down or had to step down, we'd have to see what kind of a president J.D. Vance would make.
Right. Well, there is the 25th Amendment mechanism, but I think
it's unlikely that that's going to happen.
Right, and he'd be the one that'd have to initiate it. So that's like a Shakespearean tragedy, isn't it?
Well, and if Trump refuses to step down, then you have the cabinet, which Trump selected, and that consists of loyalists, and then he needs 2/3 of both houses of Congress. So it's highly unlikely that even if there were a public perception that Trump has gone gaga, which we don't have yet, that they would succeed in deposing him under the 25th Amendment.
So just in closing, do you think that there's going to be some more shocks from the Supreme Court? For example, getting rid of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act? I don't think they're going to vote in Trump's favor on the tariffs. I think that would be a bridge too far.
Well, you don't know, because there's been reliance on the tariffs, and you'd put the government in the position where they'd have to refund billions of dollars in collected tariffs. So they might do it prospectively, but certainly it's in the public interest that you have all this money coming into the Treasury.
Well, Jim Zirin, I thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a happy holiday in spite of what we've been talking about.
Well, the very same to you. It's the season to be jolly, and we'll all try to be jolly.
Okay. And again, I've been speaking with James Zirin, the former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York and the host of the critically acclaimed television talk show Conversations with Jim Zirin, which airs on PBS. He's the author of Supremely Partisan, How Raw Politics Tips the Scales in the United States Supreme Court, and plaintiff-in-chief, a portrait of Donald Trump in 3,500 lawsuits. And he's a contributing editor at the Washington Monthly, where his latest article is Brown, Bondi Beach, and the Rhinos, the Murderous December. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into how it's time to accept that the United States Supreme Court is illegitimate and must be replaced. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Samuel Moyn, the Henry R. Luce Professor of Jurisprudence at Yale Law School and a Professor of History at Yale University. He's written several books in his field of European intellectual history, human rights history, and law, including Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War, and Liberalism Against Itself, Cold War Intellectuals and the Making of Our Times. His forthcoming book is Gerontocracy in America, How the Old Are Hoarding Power and Wealth and What to Do About It. And he has an op-ed at The Guardian, It's Time to Accept that the U.S. Supreme Court is illegitimate and must be replaced. Welcome to Background Briefing, Samuel Moyn.
Hi, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, Samuel. And at this point, it's pretty clear that Pam Bondi and Trump's former lawyer, the Deputy Attorney General, along with Kash Patel, don't give a damn about the outrage being expressed by congressmen, particularly the two congressmen, a Republican and a Democrat, who led the discharge petition. They're furious at only 10% of the files that are supposed to be all released on Friday were released, and they're heavily redacted, and they're trying to pin it all on Bill Clinton and keep Trump out of it, along with Melania. So that kind of contempt, how do you think the Supreme Court looks upon its critics too? Because Bondi and company are just a cynical use of power. And I suspect in many ways the Supreme Court feels that way about criticism. What do you think?
I think there's been a big change, and that's the premise of our piece at The Guardian, that there was a time when even conservatives, or especially conservatives, thought that the public standing of the Supreme Court mattered. And the most famous example of that is the Casey decision, which upheld Roe v. Wade in 1992, where the conservative justice who decided to save Roe said, well, look, we don't just sit up here to determine what the law is. We also have to keep the Supreme Court popular. And what we can see now is that this next gen set of conservatives are willing to put their own institutions' popularity to the torch in order to achieve ideological ends. So our basic starting point in the op-ed is to say, yeah, the Supreme Court justices on the right are acting like those politicians you mentioned and making a calculus that maybe they don't have to be popular if they can get what they want done.
But it seems that John Roberts, in a way, deceived us all by being this genial umpire that calls balls and strikes, when the record is pretty clear, and I think it's becoming increasingly clear, that he's engineered this conservative takeover, and it seems to be, at least to my mind, predicated on the notion that they must make sure that the Republicans are not the minority party, no matter how the electorate votes. And as you point out in your article, there are many failures to the undemocratic features of our written constitution, the Electoral College and the Senate most notably. And then if you add gerrymandering to that, it seems to me that seems to be the mission here. He started out in the White House basically trying to make sure that people voted for Republicans, particularly in Florida, not for Democrats. Do you think that's at the heart of it, to make sure that you have a viable Republican Party, if not a perpetual domination in spite of the demographics?
I think it's a great hypothesis, but I think the truth is probably that there are a bunch of conservatives and they don't completely agree and they have a lot of ends. So, I mean, Roberts, you're right, fooled us, but he's also evolved. And it wasn't that long ago that he didn't vote with his colleagues in Dobbs because he thought that we could get the same results without this showy overturning of Roe v. Wade and Casey. So that wasn't that long ago. And yet, under this administration, he's been much edgier in abandoning his pose of institutionalist. And I would say the heart of it for him and some others on the court now is actually the vision of executive power that they've long held. And they've long been preparing for a Trump, and they just got one. And actually, I mean, this is just pure conjecture. I don't think they actually support most of Trump's policies or Trump himself. But what they really believe in is the vision of the executive office that Trump holds. And he's giving them the opportunity of a lifetime to expand that power. And so I agree with you that there are other dimensions of what they're doing that involve the perpetuation of the Republican Party in power. But the amazing thing is that, if one had to guess and choose one thing, it's the presidency and its authority above all that matters to this right-wing coalition on the court, and it's driving, I'd say, kind of the most radical steps they've taken.
But do you think that they want to hand over this unitary executive power to Democrats? I mean, they're going after Section 2, it seems, of the Voting Rights Act. Section 5 was already eliminated.
Sure.
And as I mentioned, and I think you agree, that there seems to be a focus on making sure that, even having a one-party state. So
Yes.
Why would you then go to all that effort to hand over that power to a Democrat?
Well, so I maybe I'm naive, but I think that they have limits, and they do expect there to be Democrats serving as president in the future. It's absolutely true that they have double standards when that occurs, and when Biden did some of the same stuff as Trump, they called him on it, maybe most notably in his attempt to forgive student loans. So they have, ways both to expand executive power and to deny Democrats that power when Democrats happen to win presidential elections. I do agree that it's not just about executive power, and you're certainly right that they're doing other things to help Republicans, like approving their gerrymandering at the state level. But if we get too conspiratorial, we miss just like how much of a kind of egghead, like even boutique project it has been for decades for these right-wing jurists, long before our moment, to rethink the American state. And they're intellectuals and not just ideologues. So they have this like set of beliefs that America went wrong in the New Deal, or even before with Woodrow Wilson. And we shouldn't have an administrative state, and we should have a strong presidency that can fire anyone in the executive branch. And so these are like dogmas that they care about equally as much, I think, as what's happening from day to day in elections around the country.
So, what explains, though, what appears to be incredible naivety about Citizens United, for example, going back to Scalia, who insisted that money equals voting? Then I recall just after Citizens United, when Obama gave an address to the nation, the one representative of the Supreme Court that was there was Alito. And when Obama pointed out that Citizens United would open the floodgates of foreign money pouring in and corrupting our elections, Alito mouths, "Not true." Well, it is true. It has been proven true. And I think anybody with a reasonable mind could have predicted that if you open the floodgates for unlimited dark money, you're going to have the results we have today. And whether they wanted those results, that's a cynical interpretation. But if they didn't want those results, then they're naive. So which way do you come down?
Well, I think that they recognized that there are a lot of rich Democrats and a lot of corporations led by Democrats. And so we don't call their donations dark money, and it's not maybe as influential or massive. But Citizens United also transformed the way Democrats run, and only some outsiders like Bernie Sanders, who famously collected way more based on small donations, have escaped the dynamic on the Democratic side. So I totally agree with you that we have to be attempt to put the different things the right wingers on the court are doing together. And even in recent days, Sam Alito gave a lecture in which he said, well, Citizens United is much maligned, but wrongly so. But even there, these are business-friendly conservatives. They like money, they like wealth, and they've joined actually the liberals in the past 50 years in moving our public law in a much business friendlier direction. And so I would say they're as much neoliberals, and friends of the wealthy across partisan lines as they are just Republicans who only want Republicans to win, which is also true.
But how did one man, Leonard Leo, how was he able to shape this Supreme Court with a lot of money from oligarchs? And many suggest, and in fact, Senator Whitehouse has enunciated this on a number of occasions, that the oligarchs who backed Leonard Leo and got this supermajority on the Supreme Court basically could never sell their terrible ideas through the legislative branch. So they chose the judicial branch as a soft target, and they've had amazingly successful results.
Well, I would tell a slightly different narrative. There's a lot of truth to your narrative and Senator Whitehouse's narrative, but the other part of the truth is that liberals themselves, when they were losing popularity in the country, chose judicial power as their means of getting what they wanted, and it lit a fire under conservatives to do the same thing and to take over the Supreme Court, which they did. So it's in the long view, I think both sides have angled to control the court and to get their way through judicial decision making. Now, it's absolutely true that conservatives played their cards better and just got a string of luck with Ruth Bader Ginsburg foolishly deciding to stay and bet on her longevity, and that went south. Mitch McConnell was a brilliant strategist, if from his perspective, in getting, right wingers on the bench and denying the spots that liberals even, thought they deserved. But like all of that is predictable because politics is a struggle for power. And I think the Democrats just have not been as good at it, mainly because they haven't won enough elections. But even when they have, they've failed to do the things that Leonard Leo did. Now, I don't think they should. I think Democrats should stop trying to control the country through controlling the judiciary, which is the way they operated for decades. And that's what caused the Federalist Society to be born in the first place. So what we need to do is step back from this partisan narrative that I think I agree with when you recite it, but think about, well, wait a minute, why do we have 9 justices running the country? If you do that, of course you're going to have politics reduced to a struggle for who the 9 justices are, and then a lot of accidents and strategy determining the answer to that question. What happened to democracy, where we actually attempt to convince our fellow citizens of the right future for the country?
Well, the only democratic means we have in the Constitution is the Senate's advice and consent and the confirmation process. And I guess when you look at that, the history of that, if you go back to when Biden was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he dropped the ball on Clarence Thomas. I don't think there's much doubt about that. And then I remember at the time of Alito's confirmation, I talked to a Democratic legal scholar. He said, "Oh, there's no problem with Alito. There's absolutely no problem with him." I mean, and clearly, in retrospect, there've been more than just this extraordinary attitude. And then when you come to Kavanaugh, Senator Feinstein totally dropped the ball. Whether or not they could have established, I mean, I'm not sure how strong a case it is for a 16-year-old.
Ian, is your idea, is your goal to have liberals on the Supreme Court, but to leave it as powerful as it has become? Because that's what you're arguing. And I respect it. And it's very understandable to indict senators for failing to get enough liberals on the Supreme Court and block reactionaries when they had the chance. But if that's your only criticism, what you're really saying is that liberals should control the Supreme Court and run the country that way rather than by winning enough elections. And that's where I just disagree. I look out and see the Democrats failing to build a majority in this country, not so they can control the courts, so they don't need a majority, but so that they can enjoy what FDR enjoyed, like a vision for the future of the country that was so broadly popular that it didn't matter what resistance the courts put up.
Right. Well, I think I'm arguing for some means to stop incredibly reactionary people getting on the court, because when you talk about liberals on the court, there were liberals in the old days, William O. Douglas, Thurgood Marshall. But
of course, that's true.
Since then, I wouldn't call the centrists anything like the liberals of old.
Well, I agree with that completely, but that's a story about how the Democratic Party changed and became much less racially progressive and much business friendlier. And as I mentioned, we're living with the business friendliest court really in a century, with the liberals participating. It's true that they dissented in Citizens United, but I think if we just hanker for the Warren Court, we're not thinking about, well, why did the right get so exercised about the role the Supreme Court was playing and succeed in taking it over by winning elections, by playing on the unpopularity of the Supreme Court in order to put together its own coalition. And they at least won enough elections to stock the courts with their friends in high places. And that's what we're living through. So I'm just wondering whether we should take this opportunity to think broader and think about what progressives should do with and to the court in the future, rather than just pray for liberals to return to staff it.
Right, and we've seen how Mitch McConnell scuttled Merrick Garland, but look what Merrick Garland was like as an attorney general. So there's the case that you brought about.
Yeah, no, we're really making the same point now, because if you had the liberal dream of getting Merrick Garland on the court instead of Neil Gorsuch, of course it would be better. And of course, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had resigned at the right time or survived longer, it would be better. But these are not left-wing individuals.
Right.
They're really actually, like, in many ways themselves pretty conservative. And I think, the disappointment liberals have felt in Merrick Garland's conduct as Attorney General is proof of that. But there's a deeper philosophical issue, Ian, which is, how do you get your way in politics? Is it by setting up so powerful a court that we convert politics into a struggle over who serves on them? Or do we go out to our fellow citizens and say, here's the way the future ought to look. Why don't you vote for my side?
Well, on that note, I thank you for joining us here today, Samuel Moyn.
Thanks, Ian. Good to be here.
Likewise. And again, I've been speaking with Samuel Moyn, who's Henry R. Luce Professor of Jurisprudence at Yale Law School and a Professor of History at Yale University. He's written several books in his field of European intellectual history, human rights history and law, including Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War, and Liberalism Against Itself, Cold War Intellectuals and the Making of Our Times. His forthcoming book is Gerontocracy in America, How the Old Are Hoarding Power and Wealth and What to Do About It. And he has an op-ed at The Guardian, It's Time to Accept that the United States Supreme Court is illegitimate and must be replaced. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
One more light goes out.